that position. I'm not beholden to anybody, not taking money from anybody. I can do what I want, I can do what you want more importantly. I can protect the environment. Nobody can tell me what to do. Nobody has ever told me what to do. I will stand up there and I will fight and I will call them down, I will shame them, and I will let you know what's going on. Because those people can't stand the light. They operate in the dark. And we got to stop that. That's one of the things I'll do up there, try and get everything into the light, into the real sunshine that they give lip service to, that they don't do.
So let me rephrase the question just to make sure I understand it. So the question is learning about us as candidates normally comes from either the attack ads that are put out by these political committees or by the political committees that support us, right? So it does give them some sort of coverage, right? We actually definitely have terms for that in the intel industry, I'm ashamed to say. But we like to give people that benefit of being able to deny, right? Well, fortunately for me, I don't feel obsolete because there's literally nothing out there about me that I haven't said myself, and I don't have a PAC, so nobody else is putting anything else out there about me. Unfortunately for Bob, I get mailers, I think, 3 or 4 times a day that are either for Bob or against Bob and for Dana, and I think it's ridiculous because I always look at the bottom, just see what that fine print says. What are these PACs that are coming together? And it all comes down to the money. It all comes down to the way that the laws are written right now are in favor of these PACs being able to just funnel almost $3 million into a campaign. Whereas me, man, I can only get $1,000 from a person, and I can barely get that because I don't have the time to spend on it. So I think the laws need to be rewritten. I think that we need to find ways to even the playing field.
All right, thank you.
Betsy Hapner. I too was at Louise Ferguson's service, and here I am. And I cited Dana there. Would each of you tell us your position on the restoration of rights for felons who have completed their sentences?
So that would depend on what type of felony you're talking about and what the sentence was. I've talked to a lot of law enforcement officials who they believe that the punishments are not harsh enough. In some instances, I have to agree. They definitely are letting some people out because the jails are overcrowded, and some of them are violent felons. I do not agree that we should restore all rights, carte blanche after they've served their sentence. Are there some? There should be a review process? Sure, absolutely. If someone, like you just saw in the papers, England decided to clear all the people who were jailed or called criminals under their I can't remember the name of the act, the Homosexual Act, which made them all villains. England decided, hey, we need to get rid of this and redo our rights. Obviously, in America, we do a lot of things that we say, ooh, we shouldn't have done that. Marijuana gets passed. I believe that people that were convicted under marijuana charges, I think they should be granted their rights back. So that's something that needs to be reviewed. But carte blanche, absolutely not.
Florida's woefully out of step with the national movement towards criminal justice reform. Even states like Texas and Alabama, with reputations for harsh justice, have made important strides in this regard. While our states waste critical resources on filling the pockets of special interests like private prisons and drug testing companies. If elected, I will fight too. Reform sentencing to reduce the number of nonviolent offenders in our prison system. Implement a safety valve to give judges discretion in mandatory minimum cases. Reform civil forfeiture laws which allow the taking of personal property even when the owner is not charged with a crime or let alone convicted. End private prisons in the state. Increase funding for transitional programs for felons exiting the system. Put an end to harmful probation practices that act as a tax on the poor and increase recidivism. Pass automatic voting rights restoration to give voice to more than 1.5 million Floridians whose voices are silenced by the current system, where applicants wait an average of 6 years for clemency. More funding for improved police training that will give cops better skills to deal with the community they are policing. Anti-bias training programs for Florida law enforcement. End capital punishment in Florida. It's a huge waste of state resources and doesn't reduce crime. And it violates the 8th Amendment's cruel and unusual punishment clause. More resources for
Mr.
Florida
Redner.
Public Defender's Office.
Mr. Redner, if you could wrap up the statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Betsy, absolutely. It's a sad legacy in our state that we are, I believe, one of 2 states that has the harshest restoration process in America. And the racial component cannot be overlooked. It has to be addressed because it has a significantly larger impact on racial minorities. I'll never forget the night my son had an auto accident, went the wrong way down the street, and the policeman was so nice, patted him on the head and sent him on his way. And every year after, I kept thinking, if he had been African American, would he have gotten that same polite treatment from the police officer? My son's now successful, does great, but how many kids get into the system and have those sorts of those experiences? So yes, it's a horror, it's a shame. You know why it's happening, because it's been a strategic decision by people that are trying to exclude that 1 million+ voters from the rolls. It's inappropriate in a democracy. I would hope someday we'll have a more sensible U.S. Supreme Court which would find that once you've done your time, you cannot continue to be punished. If you've done your time, you cannot continue to be punished. But right now, it's good.
All right, thank you all. We always like to have our newest members be able to ask questions at their meetings, so we're going to go to Mr. Bailey, and then Mr. Shoup has a question. Mr. Bailey.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to read this so I get it right. Given that the Lake Wales gyp stack, which was properly permitted and designed according to the best available science and engineering, failed catastrophically, what assurance can we have that a similar stack in northeast Hillsborough County, just a mile from the Blackwater Creek, which is a tributary to Hillsborough, 2 miles from the Hillsborough River, 3 miles from Crystal Springs, won't similarly fail? And how in the world is it that we're considering a 576-acre new stack there?
First of all, this is a local regulation issue, I believe, and not a state issue, but I am committed to doing this with real science. And this is a good time to say there's real science and then there's pretend science to try to get through a process. This is the time for real science to see what's really down there. And you know, one of the reasons fracking, by the way, is so inappropriate for Florida is we have these, it's like Swiss cheese down there. It's limestone. Water can go anywhere. This is totally inappropriate, and it may well be inappropriate for the kinds of industrial uses that you're describing because of what we have down there. But I'm still willing to listen to the science, but it's got to be real science.
I just wanted to say, EPC is a local. EPC is a local program where we have 15 delegations. As far as the Mosaic facilities in this county, we have air delegation for their air permits, but the permitting of those gyp stacks rests with the FDEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, at the state level, and all decisions are made in Tallahassee. Thank you.
You mean the underfunded DEP?
Thank you for the clarification, Janet. Joe, you can answer that question.
I will write and introduce the most ambitious environmental legislation the state has ever seen that addresses the effects of climate change, reduces statewide carbon and methane emissions, regulates polluters and the dumping of toxic chemicals, bans all current forms of fracking, revitalizes and protects our estuaries and rivers, protects our beaches and wildlife, and promotes solar and other forms of sustainable energy. Why shouldn't Florida be leading the way in solar energy? Lake Okeechobee has become a large toilet for big agriculture and big sugar. Basically anyone that will pay enough to our legislatures for their campaigns. When the toilet gets full, they flush it by opening the gates and let the poison water flow to our west and east coast beaches in the southern part of the state and into the Everglades, killing the fish, sticking up the joint, and killing our tourist industry. The sugar industry contributed $57 million to the Florida elections in the last 22 years. That's how our current politicians do business. It's also time to write a regulation that gets sugar crops out of Florida. It doesn't belong here in the first place. It belongs back in Cuba. I have been a fierce critic of U.S. sugar's reckless dumping of toxic chemicals into our waterways. Dana Young has, despite her lies about it, voted to pass legislation allowing fracking and has voted to allow polluters to regulate themselves so they decide how much pollution they can dump into our
Mr.
water.
Redner, you wrap?
That's 100% unacceptable.
All right, thank you. Yep, we can allow Mr. Upthegrove to answer the question on gypsum stacking then.
Okay, so I could say this. When my family first moved into Florida in the early 1800s, it is a much different place now than what they first saw. My grandfather, actually, prior to my deployment last year, I wanted to do something with my grandpa because he's getting old and I didn't know if I was coming back. So we went and got a boat on Lake Okeechobee and we went bass fishing. And my family, they come from fishermen that made their living on Lake Okeechobee. And I got to tell you, my grandpa wept. He openly cried at the state of the lake today. Having a gypsum stack here, is it good business? Well, it might be good business for some people. Is it good for the tourism industry in Florida? I don't think so. I mean, I spent Memorial Day weekend up on the Weeki Wachee, and I got to tell you, I thought that was an amazing natural resource. I think that Florida has so many beautiful natural resources that need to be preserved.
All right, thank you. Mr. Shoup?
I'm going to go back down to Okeechobee, and I was wondering if any of the candidates have any viable solutions for the horrible algae blooms we see that are emanating from Lake Okeechobee. Any solutions for that, or do they think the status quo with privatized farming, aqua farms, is okay? Thank you.
I have signed the Now or Never Glades pledge, which you should read online. But one of the terrible things Dana Young did is she participated in diverting the Amendment $1 that we all passed as an additional revenue source that was designed principally to provide the treatment, help provide the state's share of the treatment cost. The feds do a matching amount, but you've got to have the state's portion. And a lot of that got diverted to regular salaries and totally inappropriate things. And by the way, Dana's taken over $66,000 from U.S. Sugar over the last few years. Yeah. So the answer is, before Governor Scott arrived, there was already a plan in place on how you would create treatment centers. They had the land figured out, the contracts were signed, and it all got stopped. Dana Young was part of that process. It's the short-sightedness of people is amazing, because the scientists have predicted forever. If you keep putting the fertilizer in Lake Okeechobee, you're going to get the algae blooms. And sure enough, we got exactly what you could predict when you don't do the treatment process. It's way unfortunate that this hasn't been done a long time ago. One of my favorite sayings is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time to plant the tree is today.
Cane doesn't belong to grow in Florida. They have to force it to grow with a whole bunch of chemicals that they don't even want us to know what the hell they are. So what we do is get rid of the sugar crop. That frees up Lake Okeechobee again. 15% of what the nutrients that go into, and the bad stuff that go into Lake Okeechobee, is from the regular people around there. 85% comes from the sugar and big ag. Get rid of sugar, and we can start cleaning that thing up. Revitalize Lake Okeechobee. Damn, Joe. Anyway, the swamp. The Everglades, damn. Revitalize the Everglades. We need to, as I said, and everybody here has said it, we need to preserve our natural resources. And we're not doing it. And it's got to be done, or we're all or our children and our children's children are going to perish.
Thank you, Joe. I believe it's over to Sheldon.
So, Lake O. Yeah, it's a big problem. The way things used to run prior to the Army Corps of Engineers coming in, deciding that we needed a whole bunch of canals cut into Florida to drain the land, it was all a big watershed, right? Water would run down into Lake O, from Lake O down into the Bay Area, down there in the Everglades. Some of the most important resources are down there. Why? Because that feeds into a huge ecosystem out in the Gulf. So how do we get rid of it? Got to stop some of the industry from dumping so many chemicals there. Around there are better practices they can do. Should we shut down all industry that has anything to do around Lake O that's pumping chemicals? No, we just make them practice better. We make them do better things. Like, if for some reason, and I don't know why, but if you go out there, you'll find that people have this 1970s way of thinking, I call it, where they're like, oh, I'll just dump my trash on the side of the road. I'll just go out in the woods because I don't want to pay to get rid of something. I don't know where that kind of thinking comes from and why it continues, but if we can go to those companies and make them change their practices, have them filter things better, if they have to have runoff into the lake, make them put pure water back in there. If they're taking pure water out, guess what? They can put pure water back. So that would be my solution.
All right, thank you all. Just as a reminder, we got time for about 3 more questions. I got 3 more lined up. As a reminder, though, if you want to see any of this again, you can go to www.tbae.net, Tampa Bay Arts and Education Network. Of course, they've been a great partner in broadcasting this stuff for us. Ms. Vaughn, you're up.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. As a certified teacher, I want to know what's your stance on public education, the push to privatize our school, and the rise of charter schools. Also, what is your plan to support our students and teachers struggling in the most economically depressed neighborhoods?
Well, I'm sure Bob's going to have quite a bit to say on this. I know that's one of his key things. I will say that one of my cousins here in the state of Florida is also a teacher, and another cousin of mine is a teacher in Maryland. And so when I chose to run, I went to go ask him. I said, hey, listen, I know education's going to come up. My son just entered kindergarten. I'm not happy with the way the system's going, so tell me, what are your concerns? And most of the time I got back from them, money, right? There's not enough funding there. Are teachers underpaid? Absolutely. I think it's, disgusting that teachers are one of our most underpaid jobs. But how do we make them do better, right? Do we privatize things and make things more capitalist-like? Well, some instances that's working. But should it be taking away from our public schools? I don't think so. I think we need to find a way to do better with that. Standardized testing isn't doing the job that we thought it was going to do. We thought it was going to give us a metric to improve the students over time. It didn't do that at all. What it ended up doing is making your salary dependent on those tests, and that's the wrong way to go about it. So I think we need to take another look there, do a real deep dive into the true problems that are plaguing it, and then rebuild.
The legislature thinks education is for creating making schemes for their buddies. They find a problem, figure out a way to make money on it, and they sell it to you as the solution, and most of the time it doesn't work. Dana's been in the House for 6 years in the majority micromanaging education. She's complaining about what they could have fixed any time in those 6 years. We pay hundreds of millions of dollars for private companies with ties to the Scott administration to grade tests we don't need. This is Florida, and we don't even have working air conditioners in our schools. They're falling apart. We're getting plenty of private schools built, but we're not fixing the schools where the children are most at risk and get the lowest grades. Schools need help with social issues that the students and their families are faced with. Teachers need to teach. They can identify the children at risk, but we need other people to reach these families and make sure these kids have adequate nutrition and at least clean clothes to wear so that they're not ashamed to go to school. That's actually happening. So let's give teachers back control of the classroom with oversight, and let's forget about developing new ways of evaluating teachers, fancy databases and programs that have no basis in research, science, or practice. Instead, let's invest in making sure that no child is left unfed, no child lacks proper health care, and all children have access to quality liberties.
Mr. Redner, if you can wrap up.
One more thing.
Mr. Redner.
We're failing our children all to give tax breaks to rich like me. Well, I don't want your damn tax breaks. I want everyone educated to the best of their ability and desire. I want people.
All right, Mr. Redner, we're ready for our next question.
I want the suffering to stop.
Yeah, I gave you the time to get to the back there, but we do have our next question. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I didn't get to Bob. Sorry, my bad,
Bob. You have hit my special interest here. After my Leadership Florida experience, where you learn about the state's problems, unbelievable number of problems, but in my case, I said, you know what? We got to start in the first 5 years, 0 to 5. 70% of brain development is the first 3 years. 90% is the first 5 years. Those are people we're paying minimum wage to. It's way out of whack what we're doing. If you want kids in neighborhoods like that to be successful, you've got to get them what they need in those first 5 years, where it makes a tremendous difference. For those of you who are thinking about just the economics of this, I'll bring you the Nobel Prize winning economist James Heckman. He'll say for every dollar you spend on a quality program there, you'll save $8 down the road. So if you want to get those neighborhoods successful, you've got to start from birth on. You've got to be right there, help the moms be successful, help dad be successful, help parents understand how much is happening in that baby's brain in the first 3 years, and then sustain high quality programs so that those kids show up at kindergarten ready to go. Right now in this county, 35% of the kids show up not ready, and those are the ones who do not succeed at third grade reading levels, and those are the ones that cause us so much grief in the long run. You've got to start early. I will be one of the leading advocates for early learning. I won a Florida Chamber Award on this issue. I've traveled all around the nation on my own dime because I'm so excited about the potential for saving tax dollars by doing this smart.
Thank you all on that question. Before we get to our next question, another little programming note. My VP has just informed me that we do have confirmed for our election wrap-up, we do have Patrick Montega and Peter Score. So that'll be a fun, interesting meeting of two of the best regional political minds in the area. So I just want to let you all aware of that on November 18th. Ms. Nelson.
Hi, my name is Kenise, and I'm part of the Children's Movement of Florida. Bob just did a really great segue into my question because it does relate to the investment in early education in those first 5 years. So my question is, the current Florida per student allocation for the voluntary pre-K program is $2,300 per year. This is less than the $2,500 allocation of 10 years ago when VPK began. In comparison to Washington, D.C., that allocates almost $16,000 per child. If elected, what would you do to increase our state's investment in pre-K education as Washington has done?
Thank you. Ms. Nelson. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, again, you're on my issue. And here's the way states have done this successfully, is they figured out ways to fence off money. Because the legislators will just grab money when they're in that point. So Arizona, cigarette taxes go for just 0 to 5 years. In Georgia, half the lottery money is fenced off for early learning. That's the way you do it. You've got to protect this as a sustained investment over time to achieve what you want to do. And so we've got to fence off some money for that purpose. And you're absolutely right. We are terribly underfunded. We started, for those of you who might remember the Constitutional Amendment to add 4-year-old VPK programs. We started as one of the nation's leaders. We're now, I think, ranked 35th out of 37 that have programs. So we've really let it go, and it's a terrible shame. And where would you find the money? That's the next question. But you heard earlier that we've got people sitting in our prisons, how expensive it is for people on death row. It's twice as expensive as it is for people not on death row, about $80,000 a year. You've got people who are there on nonviolent drug charges. There's ways to pull money out of that system that's being wasted, and we're spending money on the end of a failed process. And let's move it down to the beginning of a process where we can actually invest and get a big return on our investment. Thank you.
Vote for people that give a damn about education. Put them in the legislature. They'll vote the money for the Head Start. That's what you got to do. It ain't never going to happen. His plan is great. The people out there won't do it. They give the money now. They don't have to go through all those machinations, all this. Say, this is money for education. Let's study it and get it to them. That's why you need people like me up there. I want people educated. They have to be. lack of education leads to crime. If you don't want people coming and robbing you, educate them like you educate your kids. Make sure they're educated. I don't have to know everything about education. There's people that do that. But I'll give them the money and the oversight to make sure it gets done.
So I think we can all pretty much agree on this. More money, right? And I absolutely, my son just started kindergarten, like I said. We had him in VPK. We were told the only thing available was a 4-hour-a-day program, which was fine for him. But my big issue now is, well, my daughter. My kids are only 16 months apart. So my daughter, though, she is only 3, even though she's super advanced. And I would love to have her in VPK. She would love to be in VPK. But she's got a November birthday, and I can't afford to put her into the paid VPK program. So, yes, more money. I think we should definitely help those programs out. How do we pay for it? Well, guess what? There's an amendment coming up to vote, right? Medical marijuana. You know how much tax money that can bring to the state that we can funnel into education and healthcare? I think we just need to do it. Everybody needs to get together and go, hey, listen, why are we denying people something that is proven, scientifically proven, to be medically beneficial? So why are we doing that when we need the money there? So, yeah, I agree with you.
All right, thank you all. And certainly last but not least, our last question bringing us home is Mr. Gary Stein.
Thank you, Sheldon, for taking away some of my fire on the next question. But Amendment 2 looks like it's about to pass, and yet it is still a divisive issue. Unfortunately, this is not Dale Roussan's day to be here, but he did run as for the amendment until after the primary election, and last week he put out a statement saying he is adamantly against it. So obviously there is some kind of division in there. I would like to know from you gentlemen, what do you think the legislator's role will be post in the Amendment 2 win, or, God forbid, the loss of that amendment?
I think it'll win. I'm voting for it. I have talked to voters who have told me their personal stories, which are absolutely amazing, and there's no question we should have it. One of the great things about this country is we have 50 states. It's like 50 laboratories. We're not the first one in on this. And so we get to learn from other states and learn what they did wrong and learn what they did right. So you've already heard on early learning, I travel all around to see how other states are doing it. I'll do the same thing on this issue. I want to do it right. I want to do it smart. I want to figure out what these other laboratories have done well and not so well. So yeah, we'll have a significant role in that. We'll have a significant role in laying out a system that avoids the abuses that some of the opponents are talking about, but still provides the relief that people are entitled to have without shame, without hassle, without the typical Florida approach to people getting stuff that they should have. So yes, I'll be deeply involved in that.
Marijuana. I don't know if you know it or not, but I had stage 4 lung cancer. I used medical marijuana. I'm not going to listen to the government when it comes to my health. And there's so much evidence out there that it helps. And it does for you. And now I'm a witnesser. I'm going to witness to it. And I'm going to tell you something else maybe you don't know. It makes you feel tolerable. You're in aggressive chemo. That's what I was in. And you get in your chair and you feel like you can't stand your skin. And you eat some of that blessed marijuana.